Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the first of our 2022-2023 Break the Box lecture series. We're calling it Old to New Adaptive Reuse in Chicago. I'm Laura Thompson. I'm the president of the board of directors for the Unity Temple Restoration Foundation, and I just appreciate you here tonight for this very special program. Over the course of our series from tonight through April of next year, we're going to look at some really amazing old to new projects. And certainly it's appropriate to be showcasing old to new here in the glorious restoration of Unity Temple. Our format tonight is to have Grant give his presentation, and then we'll open it up for a question and answer period afterward. And I'll run around and try to get you with your questions from here. After sitting vacant for nearly 2 decades, an $800 million restoration was completed on the old post office. It was the largest historic redevelopment in the country. Today, the property boasts over 2.5 million square feet of stunning multi-use space, and it's a hub of the Chicago business community, and I hope you get a chance to see it one day. This historically minded restoration and repositioning included restoration of the building's facade, windows, main lobby, the Postmaster General's suite, and historic corridors. And it was led by Grant Uhlir, the Global Director of Large Projects and a principal at Gensler. Grant has more than 3 decades of design experience in corporate headquarters, mixed-use developments, and adaptive reuse and repositioning projects all over the globe, including the world-renowned Shanghai Tower, for which he served as Executive Project Director. Grant is a trustee and a past president of the AIA Chicago Foundation Board, and is also a past president of AIA Chicago. He serves on the board of directors for World Business Chicago, and is an active member of the Economic Club of Chicago, the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, the University Club of Chicago, and as a product council member with ULI Chicago. He's a fellow with the American Institute of Architects and received his Bachelor of Architecture from Iowa State University and studied architecture and urban design at the University of Bath, England. I would help you welcome Grant Uhlir.
Thank you, Laura. Very humbling accolades. I almost need to bring it back down to sense of normalcy. Very, very fortunate to be involved in the project I'm going to talk to you about tonight. And it's amazing to be in this space. I know many of you have been here many times, but it's a phenomenal, really a world-class destination space that we're in, this Unity Temple. And thank you for all the great work that you're doing. It's really wonderful, and for this invitation. So Heidi, Laura, thank you. Alice, thank you for helping get the technology up and going, and for recording as well. So thank you. Really excited to share one of the most exciting, complex, challenging projects of the old post office in Chicago. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the building. We're going to talk about the success of the building. I know some of you here tonight have been involved in the restoration and the repositioning. And it just has been a phenomenal personal experience, which I'll share some stories as we go through as well. As Laura mentioned, the project, over $800 million in redevelopment investment, the largest redevelopment project in the Western Hemisphere when it was completed, and it is receiving accolades from all over the world as a opportunity to remake old, outdated spaces into new uses. And I'm going to talk more about that as well. So a gateway to the loop. Most of you have probably driven under this building at some point and are very familiar with the building. It is a historic gateway to the city, and it's also a building that really is referred to as the Grand Dame of Architecture in Chicago. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time at the beginning here looking in a rearview mirror, talking about the building's history, and it really understanding the authenticity of the space, the bones of the building, what it was used for, what was it designed for initially, really led our entire redevelopment team through the process. It helped answer a lot of the questions that we were going through at the time, what to do. And I want to also thank McRusty Historic Advisors, who was very involved from the beginning of the project in research and contributing to the content I'm going to cover today, as well as Tom Rossiter, an architectural photographer who took many of these shots that are in the presentation, and Lori Westerman. We've introduced and integrated their work into the new space as well. So this before and after, and there's some images later on this evening, you'll see that. You know, you've driven through it, you've walked through it, you've probably been by it on the river, and this location is just a phenomenal spot on the city and on the skyline. The world knows about this building. It's been used in a lot of different movie sets. You might remember it was in recently, not was in Sim City, which was used as a computer game simulation. It's been in The Dark Knight. One of, Joker robbed the place. Aliens invaded the building during Transformers. This building that you drive through on the river. Here's an image of Dark Knight. If you've seen that movie, this was taken from the grand lobby space. So if you look at that in the image behind me, and then what it's turned into is pretty phenomenal. You know, Transformers, we are not landing things on the roof of this building, but in the movie they did. It's an amazing roof stop, and you're going to get a chance to see what it's come to. Sim City, as I mentioned, a computer game for children where you build a city. So there's all of us have a history with this iconic building. I'm going to do a little bit of Old Post Office, or OPO as we call it, 101. It was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2001, and it was referred to as the Old Chicago Main Post Office Building. One of a kind building in the historic context of Chicago, and is both locally and nationally significant for its historic role in mail delivery. As the main mail facility for Chicago, it made possible efficient, comprehensive postal service for the city and the larger metropolitan area. It was a nexus of activity for transport of mail throughout the country, including delivery via rail. Were built over some railroad tracks, which I'll touch base on in just a moment. Critical in the communications of the United States, well before the internet, and it was really how people communicated and conducted their life through the mail service. Vast quantity of personal business letters, advertising materials. One of the reasons why the building grew over time, and I'll talk about the initial building and then the building that was added onto, was at the time in the late 20s, mail order was a new phenomenon in the United States. And so companies based in Chicago at the time, Montgomery Ward's, Sears Roebuck, even Spiegel catalog, you would order things through the catalog and they would deliver parcel post through the post office. So with that amount of handling, the post office needed to be a significant size. 60 years of service in this building. In 1966, the building came to a halt when a log jam of over 10 million pieces of mail clogged the system for almost a week. Chicago at the time rated worst in postal deliveries, and a new main post office was proposed to be constructed just south of this building where it is today, the new Postal Service. In 1997, the old building was vacated and the Postal Service moved into a new modernized building. Modernized being very 2 stories, very horizontal. All the distribution is done horizontally in the new facility. It was done really vertically in the original building, and I'm going to talk about that as well. And so at that time, 1997, became a magnificent journey for this icon. Amazing decay, the building not been well kept, many different iterations of mixed-use scenarios to reposition and renovate the building. Things like a casino, which is in the current discussions going on, not at this building, but on the river just north of here. Hotel, office, residential, nothing gained traction at the time. And so in the spring of 2016, 601W out of New York City, a developer became the owner. And they have other notable Chicago projects and buildings like the Aon Center, Prudential, 600 West Chicago, which is recently sold, buildings up and down LaSalle Street near the Board of Trade, etc. They closed on the building in the spring of 2016. And that's when Gensler and my team got involved to help them really move this project forward in a very timely and efficient manner. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. The building striking design was originally designed by Chicago-based firm Graham, Anderson, Probst and White. Many of you probably have heard that name. And they did amazing buildings at the time, Civic Opera, the Merchandise Mart, the Board of Trade, et cetera, throughout Chicago. Its influence in the theme of Art Deco and a visual landmark on the western edge of downtown. Again, you drive through this building. It's a horizontal building, yet it's about 150 feet in height. But as it compares to the other vertical buildings in the loop, it looks quite different. The building is unique with this vehicular passageway, the Congress Parkway. This was built into the building as part of the design in 1934, before the roadway was there, before the bridge across the river was there. And so they envisioned connecting as part of the Burnham and Bennett plan of Chicago to have a roadway through the Ida B. Wells current roadway and Congress Expressway. You remember the traffic reports, so many minutes from Hillside to the post office, or from the Dan Ryan to the post office, et cetera. So people would gauge their commutes at how many minutes to the post office. Many are not aware that the building was built in in multiple phases. The original building in this image here, just to the east, parallel to the river, was constructed in 1921. And it was referred to as the United States Mail Building. And we refer to it today as the East Building. So if you take a look at the image there, built over the railroad tracks. At the time, Union Station was being constructed just to the right of the image and a little bit north in its current location. And it was located really in place of this plan of Chicago. And rail mail compatibility was a big deal at the time in the early 20s. Had 6 above-grade stories, clad with buff-colored brick. You see that image here in the red is where that building was, parallel to the river, and terracotta trim. It combined both classical style, ornament on the Van Buren facade, and an overall industrial visual character, exemplifying its primary use as a transfer center for parcel post. Here's the East Building. Today, the East Building facade is partially visible, facing the river. But when the addition was built, the addition here, you see that it really encapsulated or sort of grabbed onto that original East Building. The wings to the far south and to the far north were demolished for the 1932 building to be built, and that was finished in 1934. as the city was really growing in its size and needing more mail capacity. The largest post office facility in the world at the time. While that construction was happening, the mail building, or the east building in the foreground, had to stay in operation while the new building was being built. I mentioned the Burnham and Bennett plan of 1909. This plan called for a new post office to be built along the Chicago River. This was an image of that plan in its location with the red box, just north of Union Station. Instead, the decision was made to place the new building south of the rail terminal and to incorporate the existing United States Mail building, or that east building, into the larger main post office. It shifted to where its location here on this slide is, where it is today. The Chicago Daily Tribune followed plan of the old post office, commenting on the seemingly endless delays in the start of construction caused by federal wrangling over the building's site and construction financing and design. Finally, in May of 1932, U.S. Postmaster General Walter Brown laid the cornerstone for what was touted as the largest post office in the world. Once construction started, it proceeded very, very quickly. So coming out of the Depression of '29, from 1932 to 1934, it was finished. And the cost of the building at the time varies pretty wildly in its range, but anywhere from $16 million to $22 million. So when you think about $800 million today, the original building that you see in that photograph was around $20 million. Here's its location. Images of that building during construction. Amazing events have happened. This was the grand opening celebration. Very, very big deal for the city and for the Postal Service at the time. It's about 800 feet long from north to south, so left to right on the image, and it's about 345 feet east to west. Very, very large floor plates, 250,000 square feet on a floor, which is something that the client, the developer, really saw as beneficial to leasing out as office space. The rooftop or the building can accommodate 4 football or 4 soccer fields. I was thinking about this today. You could have 4 World Cup games going on up there at the same time. And the Merchandise Mart, which is another very large building that you know along the river, fits inside this building, as shown in this image. So just to show you the scale, and this is actually 2 buildings that are of historic nature. One is Santa Fe building, right across from the Art Institute. That's the building on the right. And then the Carson Perry Scott building is the one in the center. So you could take a series of buildings and put them inside this. Just the sense of scale. Yes, that's a good point. That's a good point. We're going to. And the other piece, you know, as I mentioned, it's about 190 feet in height, including the corner pylons. Translates into 12 floors in the building's north section. That's on the image to the left, the north building, and 9 floors in the rest of the building. The 9 floors were used for a variety of postal delivery, processing, storage areas, and really became a great space for these technology tenants that are in the building today. It sits entirely over railroad tracks, Metra, Amtrak, and has a series of smoke plenum and chimneys throughout the building to exhaust the diesel exhaust from the track level diesel engines for the trains. So that had to be accommodated as well. Occasionally, and you might remember some of this, those that have been in Chicago for a while, there were fires in the chimneys. When debris was caught in the chimney, it was ignited by the hot exhaust gas. That was one of the things we really had to work closely with the city and the Fire Prevention Bureau day one to maintain the safety of those smoke vents. The Van Buren facade, this is the primary entrance for the public, if you will, provided access to the main lobby, which stretches across the entire length of the building from east to west on Van Buren. Monumental granite stairway, access to these bronze entrance doors. This is all original that's been replicated and refurbished. Inside the main lobby, if you remember that Dark Knight image from before, the walls are dressed in white marble, 38 feet in height. And this is an image during the renovation, not complete, but in between when you see some of the windows missing in the foreground. And so there were a series of gold mosaic tiles with a variety of bronze inlaid plaques. These are graphically telling the story of the history of the post office and how mail was distributed. These were air vents in the space, and we've restored them back to their original glory. Amazing handcrafted cut glass bronze lanterns. These are about the size of a phone booth, for those that remember what phone booths used to be or were. Yeah. It's true. So yeah, different technologies, different systems at the time. We've refurbished these lanterns. We actually took them down, sent them to St. Louis. There was a restoration group that did a painstaking restoration of the lights. We put LED technology, so now the lights can change colors because there's a lot of events in this space, and it is a much more energy efficient, appropriate solution for those. You know, when you stand in the lobby, it's just a really amazing space. And it's not only the building entrance for the tenants, but also in a great event space. There's been many, many events in the building since it first opened. Just behind the lobby, heading south over the expressway, is where all the work was done. You know, massive automation, you know, behind the public face, really the bowels of this incredible structure. And you see some of those images here. This is an image that Tom Rossiter took, one of the photographers, when we first started getting involved. The building had been vacant for 20 years. It really had not been maintained, missing windows, leaky roof, all sorts of things growing in the building and living in the building. And it was just really painstaking to clean up, recycle a lot of the material, and bring that back. Again, this is that lobby space, a historic photo. This is what it looked like when we first started, the inside and out. You see the image of the east building in the upper right. You see just the dilapidated, really poorly maintained project over 20 years being vacant. The building main lobby at the north end was the main point of contact between postal employees and the public. You see here people lined up. There was a postal savings bank, wholesale, retail postage, stamp windows, special delivery, money order windows, letter drops, a lockbox section, elevator lobbies at either end to get to the upper floors of that north building. The north building was used for office space. Much like the post office today, many of the federal agencies have their offices in the post office. That was true here in 1932 in that north building. And then south, a series of dispatching docks. So there was trucks to deliver the mail, obviously. About 1,500 feet took up the rest of the building's main floor. And we want to talk just briefly about historic facts of the Postal Savings Bank. There were 199,450 depositors in 1938 with approximately $94 million in deposit. 33 million worth of postage stamps and postcards were sold on an annual basis. The general delivery section served about 2,500 transient persons who called for their mail daily. It's like a mail lockbox. The information counter handled 35,000 telephone calls and in-person inquiries each month. Very, very different from today's online customer service chats, long wait time on the phones, those types of things. There were 1,100 feet of receiving platforms in the south building. A print shop responsible for printing over 1 billion labels every year. The well-appointed Postmaster General's office. Postmaster General had an amazing suite. Part of the restoration was to keep this space from a landmark perspective in place. It's become a library for one of the tenants. And there was also an area called the Nixie section, whose mission was to decipher an address on mail that couldn't be delivered because it was incomplete or illegible. And there was also something called the Dead Letter Office and Dead Parcel Post Branch, and that was the keeper of undeliverable mail. We actually, in early days, we found a few bags of mail that had been in the building for about 20 years. So a cool Chicago tidbit. Number of managers required to monitor the employees to prevent theft and to ensure quality control. At the time, a lot of money was being sent through the mail. There were a series of vaults in the building as well. And so what you see here in this image on the left is kind of the condition of one of these called Stewart's Alley, named for James Stewart. He was 1920s era Chicago postal inspector who invented this system, where it was a series of narrow, enclosed, ceiling-supported runways, if you look at the image on the right, with small viewing windows. And so the managers would go up and down and look through these viewing slits to allow or to really monitor what was happening with people opening mail or not opening mail. You could identify theft. It also served as a deterrent for workers contemplating misbehavior. There were about 7,500 people working in the building at the time on any given day, so it was really a very, very robust population for employees. 601 West, the developer, and our team, Gensler, worked very, very closely with the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, Chicago City Landmarks group at City Hall, and approximately about 1,000 feet of this Stewart's Alley was salvaged and kept in place to show how it worked originally. That was part of the negotiation with the landmark status for the project. There was a canteen in the building supporting about 1,600 employees. The canteen or cafeteria had a staff of 100 people, operated around the clock, sit-down restaurant service, cafeteria style. There was a credit union for the employees. There was a first aid station, and there was a Chicago Public Library for the enjoyment of the post office staff. Very common at the time for a branch library to be in the main post office. Hold that thought, because we have a library in the new building as well, in the remodeled building. We had 17 firms. It takes a tremendous effort. Just within the Gensler team, we had over 80 people working on the project. It's about a 5-year duration from start to finish. And these are some of the amazing consultants. The leasing team, TLO, 601 was our primary client. Bear Construction was our general contractor, and really a tremendous collaboration to make this happen. We took a deep dive in 2016 into corrective measures. I talked a little bit about that earlier, to address the exterior masonry work. Pieces of stone were falling onto the expressway. That's not a good thing, not safe. So had to tie that back, monitor that, repair the underside of the building at the track level and where the expressway went through, making sure things weren't falling there. Put in a temporary roof because we had to dry this building out, get the water out of the building. And we had to replace a series of track fans with new high-performance technology to keep that exhaust out of the building as we started the demolition and the abatement work. A lot of environmental remediation, as you can imagine, a lot of demolition work. Some of you may recall seeing helicopters early days. They actually were picking various loads off of the building roof, large white bags. We bring the demolished material up to the rooftop, and then helicopters would take it to load on trucks, and then we would take it to recycling. We were able to recycle over 9,000 tons of scrap metal. The building's a LEED Silver certification. These are some of the images as we were walking through to get the building back on life support, after 60 years of rot and decay. We also, here's another image of one of the south building spaces, peeling paint, a lot of lead abatement work, as you can imagine, asbestos, et cetera. So it took quite a while just to clean the building. And I mentioned water. This was an amazing wood floor here that expanded and contracted over time. That didn't have anywhere to go, so it just started to warp into these amazing curves. And you see the condition of the exterior wall. This is the east building, just not maintained. A lot of wildlife, a lot of plants growing in the building, et cetera. So it really took a big vision and a lot of deep breaths to work through with our team. Here's that rooftop, some of the debris being carted off. A lot of conveyor chutes and ladders being cleaned up as well. We kept some of those in place to show what the building was used for originally. Again, part of the landmark discussion. Just an amazing amount of work, remediation just to put in place. This image shows some of the water damage, which is, I never would have imagined this starting out on this project, but there were over 660,000 gallons of water in the building. It took about a year just to dry the concrete out so we could put in new drywall and new finishes, et cetera. So we really had to build that time into removing the water and getting the building dried out, dehumidifying. We use existing elevator shafts for new elevators, new infrastructure. One of the big challenges is to get people up and down in this large building timely. That was one of the key issues to address for prospective tenants. So we worked through a variety of solutions and ultimately came up with the solution that was implemented today. It includes destination dispatch elevators. If anybody's heard that technology, outside the elevator in the lobby, you pick the floor you want to go to. It then tells you which elevator to go in. There's no buttons inside the elevator, and it takes you up to your floor. It's becoming much more common today. It's much more efficient from an energy and space use standpoint. We pursued historic tax credits and worked very closely with a variety of consultants and the ownership and the National Park Service, the City of Chicago, IHPA, et cetera. This is an image of what that amount of water, essentially it's 2 Olympic pool sizes of water in the building. This pool is not in the building, but the water was. Here's an image of part of the building just with the standing water. So just a long time to dry out the building. We had to document existing equipment was part of the landmark requirements. So scales, mail chutes, conveyors, documentation of Stewart's Alley, that security elevator platform, the historic corridors, the original mosaic tiles. I mentioned various vaults, amazing technology and equipment there. So the tile floor had to be maintained in certain parts of the building, this mosaic tile, and work through that with tenant planning, et cetera. As we started to remove the layers of equipment and peeled away the building, it started to reveal some amazing things. Light starts to come in. It's a large floor plate. How are we going to get enough daylight into the building? It starts to, when you start to clean the building up, you start to see light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. And ghosts start to emerge. This is one of our team members that was in the building as well with a time-lapse photography. So the main lobby, this shows the scaffolding, but that main public lobby, was restored to its original 1932 elegance. The marble was cleaned, the stone floors were repaired, replaced and polished. The ornate lanterns and bronze revolving doors As I mentioned, were sent off site for repair and restoration. We used a lot of forensics to determine the original finishes in that space because there were so many layers of paint over the years, not too dissimilar from the space we're in right now when that restoration was happening, getting back to the original colors. The Postmaster General's office, I mentioned this on the 4th floor in the northeast corner, has amazing rich dark wood paneling windows. That was revived and restored, and it's part of a tenant suite today. We were on site very, very early, really before each floor was under demolition. And so we had to tag a series of items that we wanted to salvage and reuse and create a catalog record of what was there. We found a postcard or two dating back decades, and really was about transformation of the research that we were able to find out. It's 2.5 million square feet, but it really was full of beauty and awe. And converting this project into office leasing was a team effort to address leasing needs with Telos, who was in charge of tenant leasing, finding prospective tenants, maintaining open, clear views for natural light, the efficiency of the floor plate, opening walls between the various buildings, and then placing the new infrastructure, mechanical systems, fire life safety systems, elevators to support the floors. So you start to see when the building's cleaned out, you get a lot of light in this building. And there were studies that were done to show how that would be attractive to tenants. This is an image of the ground floor. Again, on the left side is that historic lobby. And what we've set up here is create a series of, this is on the 2nd floor, right above that grand lobby, an amazing assembly of amenity spaces for tenants. The amenities are a big driver for today's modern office space. And so on the 2nd floor, we have amenities like a 25,000 square foot fitness center shown in red with the boxing ring, amazing, Pilates, free weights, spin classes. There's a conference center available for the tenants that can seat up to 400 people. It's dividable into different size rooms. There's a library that's a quiet heads down space, much like the original library in the building. Something called the Vault, which is, I'll show you an image of that in just a second. That actually was the first space done under our work, and that was used as a marketing office to bring prospective tenants, office tenants into the building to see what the building could become. So we had to get that open right away. There's something called the tenant lounge area that overlooks the river with an amazing array of food and beverage and different tenant amenity spaces. Gaming, there's a bocce ball court, there's billiards, table tennis, etc. But also important is on a typical floor at 250,000 square feet, how do you effectively use the space? This test fit plan could accommodate about 1,200 people. So it's very, very dense. So you've got to get people in and out, provide amenities for them, etc. It proved to be very, very efficient for tenants, and they were attracted to that. And the fact that we have very high floor-to-floor heights with triple hung windows to bring light in was also an attractor. It's a benefit to being on one floor versus being stacked up on multiple floors for connecting with your employees, mentoring, talent development, etc. And from an interior finish standpoint, our team went back to the late 20s, early 30s in this sort of age of enlightenment in Chicago and across the U.S. coming out of the Great Depression. This spirit of optimism, this look and feel, moving into the Deco age as well. We use those materials, finishes, brasses, bronzes, in a new way, in the new fixturing in the building, but done in a harmonious way of what we saw in the building from the 1930s. I think that's a key point of when you do a restoration, think about what was there originally. So when you look at some of these detailing and some of the fixtures, fittings that we used, recalls that that age of enlightenment from the 1930s. Access to the river was really, really important part. And so we were able to develop a Riverwalk Plaza adjacent to the food hall to really connect the people of the building and the people in the community and neighborhood, surrounding neighborhood, into this building as well. You know, really activating the river, and we're seeing a lot of that happen. If you've been downtown along the Riverwalk, what's happening on the North Branch, really in the past, developers, owners turned their back on the river, and now they're embracing the river. And so we're doing the same thing here at this building. Start to see that existing condition from before. And so it really was taking from 1921, this forgotten legacy in a city with amazing, great city and civic pride. And now it's reawakened. You know, we say Sleeping Beauty has awakened, and the building certainly has. You know, again, starting in 2016. Condition of where the building's located, you know, that expressway that wasn't there originally, but designed in this building. I'll just pause for a minute to kind of read through this statement that we used as kind of a guiding principle for the entire team. Bold experience, spirited, dynamic, and thoughtful. You know, Chicagoans, visitors alike will welcome the old post office as their new post, to work with passion, live well, and to celebrate often. So this image was before, but these are the tenant amenities, about 85,000 square feet of shared amenities for the tenants. This is not a part of the public accessible space. It's on the second floor. So you go through a security check-in point, but it's available for the tenants. So if you're a tenant in the building, you don't need to build your own fitness center. You can use the fitness center here. You can use your conference center here, et cetera. And so this legacy reawakens. This was a rendering of that Riverside Plaza. You'll see some images of what that looks like today. You know, the restored front door of the building really came together extremely well. If you go by at night, it's very, very thoughtfully lit. And celebrated the detailing of the exterior, the windows, the stonework, the proportions. Here's an image of the grand lobby, how that's come together as well. And this is just a great gathering space for tenants to come in, meet with each other, or weddings, bar mitzvahs, organizational galas, that type of thing happen here all the time. You see that little clock that was restored. You see the detailing of the light fixtures, the floor, et cetera, all brought back to the original glory. You see those vents that I mentioned before, how they've been restored, sort of celebrating how the Postal Service delivered mail through various means and methods at the time. That's the check-in desk, but originally that was a teller line, you know, for Postal Service. Many of you would come in, or some of you may remember April 15th, tax deadline. You know, there would be clerks outside at the curb picking up tax returns as you drove by. That was all happening in this space as well. Here's one of the amenity photographs of the food hall and the concierge check-in desk on the second floor, right off the lobby. Just an amazing gathering space. Talk about the finishes, the lighting, the fixturing. The logo is somebody said it looks like a Van Halen logo. I hadn't really thought about that. But it was a interpretation of the eagle crest, which was very prominent in many, many post offices. So we pulled that and backlit that. You know, the photographs, these are photographs that Lori Westerman took during the project early phase, and we used those very, very large format prints, and we put things in like, you know, typewriters and postage scales, and really curating the space to the nth degree, and it really brings back amazing memories. This is the entrance going up to the second floor. So we have this large open volume space, much like this space in height. It's probably about 6 times the length of this space we're in today, with the food hall off to the right. And then on the second floor where we wrap all the amenities, the fitness center, the telegraph lounge, the vault, et cetera. You know, using the rollers that they would roll packages back and forth on the floors, mount them horizontally and backlit, just creates a really unique space, to celebrate that space next to the escalators. We have a postcard wall, which is really kind of a fun thing. We went and found postcards from post offices all around the world and put them up on this wall. So it has become an Instagram moment when you're there with people to go up and look at these amazing post office postcards. The Telegram Lounge, where we have the bocce court, amazing views looking back to the city and to the river, a lounge space, it's a coffee bar in the morning. It becomes a great place for lunch or to get a drink in the evening. And they've had many, many events in this space as well on the second floor. There's a fireplace that's working, great lounge space. So these are the images of the completed project. I mentioned the vault, this elegance revised and revitalized. This is the first space built in the building to help from a leasing standpoint, prospective tenants. Now it's a venue for group gatherings, celebrations. We had a team celebration here in this space for the Gensler team after the building opened, and it's just remarkable. There's actually a vault door that opens to get in, so it's got kind of a speakeasy type of quality to it, which is really, really neat. Another image of the vault and the fine level of detailing. A place to focus. This is what we call the library. So it's really meant to be a low-tech, quiet space. Get away from your desk, get away from the hustle bustle of the city and come in. And so you kind of see the type of lighting and the desk and the materials recall what a library in the 1930s might look like. This is a space, again, an image of that library space. Oriental rugs, artwork, really carefully crafted light fixtures, and curating the objects on the shelves. The fitness center, or box cars it's called. You see the boxing ring there. Just an amazing amenity for the project and for the building tenants. The graphics, just really creatively using different typology and materials for that space. Here's some images of that as well. And then the outdoor plaza called the Meadow up on the roof. Remember, this is where 4 football fields or 4 soccer fields would fit. This has become an amazing amenity for the tenants and for the city. Many, many events happen up here. And it's, when you think about 4 acres for a rooftop, it's the largest green roof, accessible roof in the country. There's a 1/4-mile running track. You see there's basketball court, there's tennis court, paddle tennis. There's beehives up here. The selection of the landscape is all indigenous. There's 35,000 different plant species on the roof. And bees are a great way to pollinate. And we also use the honey from the bees for the food purveyors in the food hall downstairs. There's an image of that as well. And if you've ever been up with the sky deck at Sears or any of their surrounding buildings, when you look down on this building, it's equally impressive as it is when you're actually in that space. This is a tenant amenity for the tenants to come up and get away from their desk on a nice day. There's a bar, restaurant, food and beverage venue at the north end that's used for many, many events as well. That's where that canopy is on the north edge. Access from these pylons at the corner. Really carefully lit and landscape selection. Herr Schaut was our landscape architect, our partner. They did an amazing job. Site Design Group did all of the site streetscape landscaping down at the street level. Took a big team from Gensler's perspective. So this was our postal team. And you talk about going postal. Some of us felt like we were going to do that every once in a while. But it really was amazing. People just leaned in on this opportunity, including myself, to have a really humbling, but to have the opportunity to do something transformative for an amazing project, amazing building, not only for the city, but for the country. Thank you very much.
you so much. Wonderful. Let's open it up for questions. I'll try to get to everyone so that you can ask your question.
Actually, it's not a question, but I wanted to tell you I had the opportunity to see the post office on a Chicago Architecture Center tour on Tuesday, and I was absolutely gobsmacked. It is one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen, and I had no idea that it was even done. So I just want to say kudos to you and your team. It's really just a jewel.
Thank you very much.
Others, questions? Yes.
I haven't been down to see it, but I understand that it's easy to park there. If you want to come in, you can park. Could you talk about parking just for a casual visitor?
Sure. It's a good question. There's parking in the building, so it is very convenient. The main entry lobby is on Van Buren. The building, the south of the building is called Harrison. And so Harrison is where the loading dock entry exit, and that's where you enter the parking garage. So it's a pay-to-park garage, takes you up to the second floor, and then you park your car, and then you go out into the second floor space right by that postcard wall. So there's about 400 parking spots there for the public. Some tenants have spaces there as well, and then there's an abundance of parking in the neighborhood.
Yes.
Thanks, Grant. Two questions. One is it fully leased? And second is, did you have much trouble with the City of Chicago Building Department?
Great questions. The remarkable thing is the building is 98% leased. It was leased up during the pandemic, which is kind of just a remarkable thing that happened. And the 2% that's left are pretty small spaces. So the leasing team did an amazing job attracting tenants. There was just a great buzz. A lot of the tenants that are in the building had an affinity toward authentic, historic, Chicago-based space, if you will. So they were attracted to the building. The amenities were a big deal to attract tenants. The timing, your second question, the city was tremendously collaborative on this. Starting from it was Mayor Rahm at the time. All of the departments rolled up their sleeves to sit down and work through solutions. You know, the city wanted this to happen. They found a developer that was going to invest significant money. The timing was just right. Chicago City Landmarks, the National Park Service, which can be challenging on historic landmark buildings, as they should be, were very willing to work with us. They understood that the original building designed for a use that was outdated. So how do you attract new tenants, new ways of working? So it was a back and forth. But the mayor assigned one of their staff persons to all of our meetings to make things happen quickly. Tremendously successful. They wanted the building safe. So the fire department wanted to make sure we were there, and so really willing to work with us all the way through. Kind of a unique time for all of that to happen. Came out really, really well.
Grant, can you talk about some of the tenants that are there today?
Sure. One of the first tenants was Walgreens. Walgreens moved their technology group, their software development team, which are young workers that wanted to be downtown in an urban setting. So they were one of the first anchor tenants to come in. Farrar Pan Candy Company is a tenant in the building. The Chicago Board of Trade has their corporate offices in the building. There's a lot of technology startups. The largest is probably Uber Freight. You know Uber, it's rideshare. Well, Uber has a tremendously large freight business as well. What better place than to be in a building that was designed for movement of freight through mail? And so they are a very, very large tenant in the building as well, and actually relocating part of their talent from other locations in the country to Chicago. So they have about 450,000 square feet in the building, which is it's 2 floors, which is quite a bit. A couple law firms in the building as well, and so it's a good variety of tenants.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, I have 2 questions also. First, who owns the land the building sits on? Is it railroad land?
It's railroad land. There's a long-term lease.
Okay, I
So
just
it's-
figured the railroads like to hold on to their land, so
Yeah.
I was figuring it was some kind of long-term lease.
And they can be challenging to work with too, to work through.
Okay, second thing, I'm a retired bricklayer now. I did not work on the building, but I was in there in spring of 2018 while this was going on, a guest of a contractor there, and I saw, it was amazing to me because I had never seen it except driving through it. But it was amazing to me that it seemed like this building was originally built to be as fireproof as possible because the contents would have all been flammable, and that it just, I was looking at it from a bricklayer's point of view, but just seeing the way things were designed and the terracotta arch floor system that most people would never see, things like that, that the whole thing was designed so that if there was a fire wouldn't spread in the building, and if it did, the building wouldn't fall down, things like that. It just seemed unusual to me. So.
Yeah, this image here, this is the vault, that kind of event space, leasing office. If you look at the ceiling here, this is in the east building, which is primarily a masonry building, brick, on a concrete frame. The ceiling are clay tiles that were used for fireproofing. And so when we were going through and removing the lay-in ceilings and the gypboard ceilings, we found that and said, let's leave that exposed, just to show what was there originally. It was used for fireproofing. Now on the south building, you can see an image here, 30-foot by 45-foot bays, so very, very large bay. It's steel and reinforced concrete, and it is fireproof by nature because of the concrete, but it also was developed because there was so much heavy equipment and movement of mail and sorting, distribution, that the floor loading is 350 pounds a square foot. Very, very heavy loading. Most modern office buildings downtown are maybe 100 pounds per square foot. So this was 3 times that. So very, very robust building and fireproof just by inherent in its nature. The building built over railroad tracks, part of this Burnham and Bennett plan of 1909. And if you think about Union Station where it is, the tracks under the post office, but all the buildings on the west side, west bank of the river going north are all air rights buildings. So the city was developed buying the air rights from the railways, not using the railway space itself. So they can still maintain operation, but we're allowed to build up above. It's probably a long answer to your questions, but thank you.
2 short questions. Is there any postal service remaining, or at least some postal boxes? And I'm forgetting my second question. Maybe I'll remember it.
There's a postal drop. There's not a postal station in the building, but there's mail drop, and there's FedEx and Airborne Express and those types of systems for the tenants.
My second question is, does it have its own zip code, like the Merchandise Mart had? Because it would be very appropriate that it would.
That's a great question. No one's asked me that before. It is not. It's part of the zip code in that part of the city.
Other questions?
You've already mentioned a couple times some of the unusual things you found when you were opening up and working on the building. Can you talk more about anything strange, unusual, bizarre that just sort of popped up or were uncovered?
One of our team members, as they were going through one of the back rooms, found a handgun. So I had to call that into the police department pretty quickly. We found a lot of old drawings, which were really great reference point. The building engineering system had a pretty good set of drawings in their engineer's office that were helpful. We found a drawing of one of the a blueprint of one of the original vault doors. There were a series of vaults because jewelry, money, things would be moved through the mail system. And we took that drawing and used that as an etching on the bronze panel in the elevators as a back panel. So when people come into the elevators, they see this etching of a blueprint drawing. That was a really kind of a nice find. Found some bottles of liquor that had been there a while. And then a lot of animals that were just have been living in the building. No, didn't find any bodies. There were a couple squatters that were in the building early that would get in and out. But yeah, no bodies.
One thing I'm curious about, I believe you said that you were able to get like a LEED silver standard with this. Can you just talk a little bit about the energy conservation, energy usage on something that's the size of a small city?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Yeah, so from Chicago has upgraded their energy code. So for any renovation work or new construction, just to meet the Chicago Energy Code, essentially is LEED silver. So in the past, it was kind of a stretch to get there, but to get to a LEED silver base point is pretty straightforward today. The other thing from a sustainable, resilient standpoint is repurposing existing buildings is much more sustainable than demolishing and building new. And there were schemes to demolish part or all of the building and build new. And I'm just really fortunate that for this building, that didn't happen. I think there were a couple questions, in the balcony in the back. Sure.
I'm curious how you partition the individual spaces to keep it open and airy, or are they, like this picture here, it looks like glass, but that's not one of the opposites, but like the merchandise market, when you walk in there, as big as it is, it's kind of a dark building to wander around in. So, and did some tenants want a lot of privacy and want it to be walled off?
It really varies by the tenant. We wanted to have the space flexible in the tenancy. So this was a test fit drawing showing a single tenant on the floor. On the left is the north building. That's about a 40,000 square foot floor plate. So it's a large floor plate in today's modern office space. For the most part, those are single tenant floors. The south building, which is about 200,000 square feet, some is single tenant, others are multi-tenant, and they would then have a demise wall between the two tenant spaces. Trying to, I don't know if there's a pointer on here or not, but trying to set up those buildings or the tenant spaces to run up and down or east-west in the plan to take advantage of the light, the western light, the eastern light, versus running them north-south. That worked out very well.
I do have a follow-up question, which I think we all have, is how do we get in to see this?
You can go down and just go into the lobby space that's open to the public during normal business hours, anywhere from 8 to 6, Monday through Saturday. You can get into the grand lobby space. You can get into the food hall. It's a great place to get lunch or stop for breakfast, cup of coffee. You can go out to the Riverside Plaza. To get to the second floor, either call me up for a tour, which I'm doing a lot of, and happy to do that as well, or a tenant in the building and they can give you a guest pass.
I was wondering who your green roof company was, your architect for that, or the company you worked with for the green roof.
The landscape consultant, Hair Shout, did all of our landscape work.
The landscape work, okay. And then my other question was, with the ductwork or the chimney work you had to do with the railroad, for the exhaust, et cetera, and your stormwater management for your LEED, how did you integrate that with the railroad underneath? And did the river play a part into that?
Great question. So the stormwater on the 250,000 square foot rooftop, that stormwater is all contained up on the roof. The structure was heavy enough to accommodate that. That was one of the things we had to work with the city because they didn't want to dump that into the storm sewer or necessarily dump that into the river. So we capture all of that, retain it up on the roof. It's a great way to irrigate the indigenous landscape. The Riverwalk Plaza, which is a little bit over an acre in size, that has quite a bit of landscape area as well to capture the rainwater. Anything excess, we're allowed to drain into the river at that point.
So I thought it might be good for you to talk also about the challenges because each of those buildings had a different ceiling height and walls in between and how that ended up working out with the tenants.
You know that pretty well, don't you, from experience? So the building was built in phases, as I mentioned. So the east building had a different structure, different floor-to-floor height. The north building, or the north part of the 1932 building, was set up for office space, so it had about 11.5-foot floor-to-floor height. The south building, which was the work building, had about a 19-foot floor-to-floor height. None of those things lined up except on the second floor. And the second floor, by the way, is the first floor right above the expressway. So that's the place that we use to sort of accommodate all of the movement horizontally. That's this image. There's the parking, back to the earlier question on parking in that corner. We had to do a lot of almost like a split level house, thinking about how tenants could bridge across those spaces. And for instance, Uber Freight took advantage of that. And so they have, not too dissimilar from the space we're in right now, they have a low floor, they have an upper floor, and they've had setups for auditorium style seating, or they have conference rooms that cantilever out over that space. And so take what might be an obstacle in the space that's existing and make it an opportunity. And it's worked out extremely, extremely well. It was challenging to understand all of those things as we were going into the project.
Other questions?
Experience any notable setbacks during the construction phase?
The amount of water in the building was an unforeseen time setback. Just being able to dry out the building, dehumidify the building. You know, part of the challenge was when you sign up a tenant, you've got to commit to an end date for them to be in their space. And you want to do that because that's when the rent starts to come in to help pay for the redevelopment. So managing those unknowns or unforeseen conditions was hairy early on because of the amount of demolition and the cleanup that had to happen. I think once that all got stripped out and we could see what was there, then it sort of allowed some of us to sleep more at night, understanding what we had to work with. And then getting that first tenant to really commit. Walgreens, being a Chicago-based company, was really instrumental in making that happen. And once that first tenant came on, momentum started to happen. Okay, this is real. It's going to happen. And so it's worked out really, really well. There was a tenant fairly late in the process, a startup company, technology startup, very young co-CEOs. They came up to the rooftop with the leasing team. It's always kind of a place to end the tour on a nice day, looking at the city, looking at all these amenities. And the two CEOs were in their late 20s, early 30s, saw the basketball court and said, we're going to be here. That was the deal. Where do we sign? They thought that was such a great amenity. So it paid for itself right there. This one in the front.
Sounds like a nice place to live. Just wondering if there's any apartments or even hotel accommodations in the building?
Good question. It's all office. It's all commercial office space. We looked at earlier schemes with residential apartments or condos. We looked at a hotel scheme as well, a variety of different solutions. But this developer had tremendous experience and really tremendous success in New York City doing similar buildings. And so they saw an opportunity to be all office. And that's just 98% leased. It's been pretty successful. It's a big undertaking. Other prior developers, looked at maybe we need to remove part of the building to make it financeable. 2.5 million square feet, conceptually, what if we took 1 million square feet out? You still have 1.5 million square feet. And so we looked at that scheme as well with a prior developer. Fortunately, or at least for me personally, I'm glad that didn't happen.
Any other questions?
There's one right behind you.
So the structure, the concrete structure and the floor plates, did you have to do a lot of reinforcement or restoration of those elements?
There was some reinforcement, not some restoration of those areas, primarily fireproofing, but the concrete was in really good shape. Throughout the building, there was some patching in some areas. We did have to do at the track level, work with Amtrak because that smoke plenum or the diesel fumes, we had to do some track level work. That's where it was tricky to get the timing to make that happen because the trains were active. So a lot of off-shift work to make that happen. And then some of the spalling limestone on the facade, we had to tie that back.
The roof structure was already strong enough to support that.
The roof structure was robust, as the whole building was. So the roof structure was about 150 pounds per square foot. Now, working with Herschel, the landscape architect, that undulating terrain that you probably saw in the photographs, much like Millennium Park, there's about 18 inches of soil. And there's perlite mixed in the soil, which is a lightweight material. Under that is just large styrofoam blocks. And so that's very lightweight. So it's not 6 feet of soil, it's just 1.5 feet of soil with styrofoam below. Very, very common way of doing rooftops today.
Yes. I'll try to get to you.
Were there any urban archaeologists or folks from the Chicago History Museum involved in documenting or taking possession of any artifacts that were found?
There were. We had members from the School of the Art Institute and the Art Institute itself. There, as I mentioned, we work with McRosty Historic Advisors, and so they were our coordinator with that. We had several people during construction would walk into the building that would say, my father used to work here, or my grandmother worked here, and just, wanted to share stories. And so we listened to their stories and shared our stories of what we found, and just this, sense of place and legacy was really, really rewarding.
Anyone else? I can, oh, go ahead.
You mentioned that you found a couple bags of mail. What did you do with those?
We turned them over to the post office. I don't know what they did with them, but we took them across the street and dropped them off.
Well, I can personally attest to the tour with Grant. It's fantastic. If you get the opportunity to go inside and take a look in person, it's really a wonderful, wonderful space. Grant, thank you so much. This has been an amazing presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm happy to stay around, afterwards if you have any other questions one-on-one. But thank you all for being here. I know it's a cold night outside, but for coming out and listening to a little bit of my story. Thank you.
I want to just, go ahead. I want to just have you mark your calendars. February 23rd is our next lecture in the series, and we will also be talking about Old to New, a story of the restoration and repositioning of the Chicago Tribune Tower. Steve Hubbard, one of the lead architects from SCB, will be here to talk about probably some similar stories about how they saved some of the historic remnants of the building, but also set it up for residents there. So I want to thank everyone. If you want to scan this, you can see our entire program booklet and all of the activities that are happening here. And go to our website, utrf.org. And thank you all for being here tonight. Appreciate it.